Secretary, we'll start with you. You obviously have a lot of experience with needing to safeguard major events. New Year's Eve on Bourbon Street, certainly one of them. And that's even before we talk about the couple of football games that are coming up. What do you see yesterday that may have went wrong? Where do you see the investigation going from here?
Well, if I were still in office, first and foremost, I'd be concerned about what appears to be the reality that there are terrorist accomplices still at large. And one of them was willing to take his own life. That presents a real public safety security challenge in the New Orleans area. I won't second guess the situation with the Ballards. They were in the process of being upgraded, apparently, in preparation for the Super Bowl. So that has to happen sometime. I will say that right here in New York City, around Times Square, you see barricades on the sidewalks. You see heavy cement barricades on the sidewalks to prevent a vehicle from plowing through a sidewalk to get into a street area like this. One of the things that those of us who've been involved in security know that in the first 24 hours after an attack like this, the level of disinformation can be very high, though it does seem as though there's an increasing body of evidence that there were accomplices in this attack. I'm not prepared to say that Las Vegas is somehow linked to New Orleans. It could be a coincidence, but it does feel as though there's a new security threat environment out there, not necessarily because ISIS is involved, but because of the prospect of copycat attacks. It does seem as though there's a new security environment out there. We've got the inauguration approaching. I heard this morning there's a rally that President-elect Trump is planning to have before the inauguration. And then, of course, you have the Super Bowl a few weeks after that, which to me suggests that the president-elect should consider asking the current FBI director, Chris Wray, to stay on and not leave on January 20. Stay on through the inauguration, stay on through the Super Bowl, which itself is a huge security environment. This is not the time to see our FBI director walking out the door in 18 days.
Following up on that briefly, so, I mean, Trump and Christopher Wray, of course, Trump is very critical of Wray in months before, was saying that he would fire Wray if he stayed on. His replacement, Kash Patel, his confirmation hearing not yet been scheduled, but there's a suggestion that it would probably fall into February because Attorney General Pam Bondi would have to have hers first. So you're concerned there about perhaps a gap in security. Are you also concerned about Kash Patel's ability to lead that agency?
Well, put that aside. What I've heard is that the Director Wray is planning to leave on January 20. That would mean there'd be an acting director in place. This is not a moment where you should have that kind of transition where the director who's been there for 7 years is walking out the door. A new director's got to come in, orientation briefings and so forth. I think through this period over the next several weeks, there needs to be some continuity in the leadership of the nation's premier law enforcement agency.
So, David, let's talk about the latest in the investigation. And as the Mr. Secretary noted, the idea that there might be links to what happened in Las Vegas. What do we know about the latest of both men here?
So Ken Delaney is going to talk in a minute, but this is coming from reporting by Ken Delaney and Tom Winter and Andy Blankstein. They're three amazing reporters I work with on the law enforcement and national security team. None of this is confirmed yet, but investigators are looking at whether the person who carried out the New Orleans attack, Jabbar, is somehow related and may have served in the military and met the person who carried out the attack on the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. That's not confirmed. It's something that they're looking at. But at this point, that's a possibility. And that might explain how both of these things happened yesterday. There was a lot of confusion. There was some questions about the FBI in terms of there wasn't as much of an aggressive. The FBI did not take over the investigation in Las Vegas immediately the way they did in New Orleans. And there's some questions about why that didn't happen faster. But at this point, that is the main lead that we're hearing about it.
Well, let's bring in Ken on this point here about Las Vegas. What can you tell us about the status of that investigation? I know when the explosion first happened, there was a lot of speculation that it was, because Elon Musk obviously it's a Tesla vehicle. He's a close advisor to Donald Trump. It happens outside the Trump Hotel. We can see the explosion here. There was some initial suggestion that may have been a mechanical failure. That has since been ruled out. What do we know as to what transpired here, and anything else you can add to to the picture we have of the possible suspect?
Well, you heard the Las Vegas sheriff say last night that there are a number of coincidences in connecting these two situations that he would like to understand better, including the fact that both vehicles were rented through this Turo service, which is like an Airbnb service to rent private vehicles. And the FBI is investigating, obviously, whether there are any connections between these two men. But I just want to go back to the whole New Orleans situation and this question about accomplices, because it's not as cut and dried as some people are suggesting. You heard that FBI special agent in charge say earlier yesterday, we don't believe he acted alone. But then later in the day, NBC News learned from senior law enforcement officials that that was based in large part on a misreading of surveillance video where they saw people who were not the suspect they thought may have been planting those two IEDs that were found in the city of New Orleans, but they've now ruled those people out. They were not involved. They were bystanders. And I was told that that was the main reason that there was this suggestion of accomplices, and that there isn't a manhunt. They don't have named suspects. They don't have people they're looking for that they believe were working with Jabbar on the New Orleans situation. Now, the Louisiana Attorney General told Lester Holt last night that she believes that there were other people helping him make the bombs at an Airbnb that was rented. We don't have that information from the FBI. That's very much in question. We're pursuing that today. So, but we do have people telling us that there are different theories, and one of the theories is that he acted alone. So it's not clear that there are people at large in New Orleans that are posing a risk to the public. We need to. That's very much an open question at this hour.
Well, Ken, if you get any more answers to those open questions, please come back to us with them. NBC's Ken Delaney, and we appreciate it as always. So, Mr. Secretary, let's talk about ISIS. When you were in office, certainly they posed a great threat. They're sort of at their peak. They've been their abilities have been degraded since, but that, as we talked last hour, a sense that they're back on the upswing. But it doesn't have to be necessarily, talk to our viewers about this, some far-off shadowy figure giving an instruction here in the States. It's just the inspiration, the rhetoric, the ideology might be enough.
Correct. I put terrorist attacks in three categories. Foreign terrorist directed attacks, like 9/11, like the so-called underwear bomber, the so-called shoe bomber. Terrorist-inspired attacks, where an actor already here in the United States or someplace else is inspired by a call from ISIS online, or simply a lone wolf actor inspired by the ideology, who wants to carry the flag, not necessarily directed by or inspired by a call on the internet. All three present real security challenges. What happened in New Orleans was the most significant terrorist attack we've seen here in the United States in quite some time. And so got to be on guard about all three. The internet makes this a much more complicated security environment.
So, David, with that as the backdrop, talk to us about from what you expect law enforcement to be doing in these next days in terms of just further exploring the possible connection between what happened in New Orleans and Denver. One would have to assume they'd have to be on high alert to think, well, could there be others? That maybe it's not just two incidents, there could be more coming. Just this sort of this culture we're in right now, where it does seem like violence would be possible, and some very, very high-profile events on the horizon. Yeah,
and Jay was correct to talk about online propaganda. The big change we've seen in ISIS is that they're putting out their own propaganda now in many different languages. And there's been attacks. There was a plot in Oklahoma City that was not carried out by a person. There was an informant who was with the person along the way, and they were arrested before they could carry out. This was something they were going to do on Election Day. But in Europe, there have been successful attacks. And there aren't direct links. It's not that there's some ISIS operative, in a remote corner of Syria telling them where to go. With Jabbar, it very much could have been him just watching these things online and then carrying out this attack on his own. And there's enough videos about how to carry out the attacks. There were, we just had the market in Germany where a car drove through a crowd. So it was the same method there. So investigators will be looking for someone who might radicalized. They'll be looking into this question. As you mentioned, are there other people who helped them with the IEDs, or did he carry that himself alone in New Orleans? That'll be their biggest question, but they'll be on alert, I think, everywhere in the days and months and weeks ahead. This has not happened in the United States for years.
Yeah.
And it shows the power, again, of this online propaganda. My suspicion is that's what happened here.
And adding to this sort of sense of unease, looking at crime here in the United States, data shows it's down. Most places it is down, but there's been a few like very high-profile incidents. Let's speak about New York City that have really unnerved people. Just in the last few weeks, we had a woman set on fire in a subway train, and she died. We talked earlier in the show about a man who was seemingly randomly pushed in front of a train. Thankfully, it looks like he's going to live. Terrifying footage just from a few days ago. And we woke up to the news this morning that 10 people were wounded in a nightclub shooting in Queens here in New York City. Just talk to us about give us a fact check about where crime data actually is, but this fear that this sort of stuff keeps happening.
Again, it does happen. The public is afraid, and it's understandable why. But you have these high-profile incidents, often online, that people see, and it drives this fear. Murder is down. That's a big positive step. But other crimes continue, property crimes. So it's going to be, I think, a priority of the Trump administration to push very hard in terms of law enforcement and countering crime, and then, again, stopping any kind of attack like this.
All right.